Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme today, Lebanon focuses on filling a more than 2-year presidential vacancy. This as a ceasefire, described as fragile, takes effect. Reports of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah near border towns have sparked concerns of potential breaches of the truce. Israel steps up its bombing campaign in Gaza, killing dozens of people, even as calls for a ceasefire grow louder following on from the Lebanon deal. And Russia carries out another major attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving more than 1 million people without power. Hello and welcome to the programme. First of all, as Lebanon enters its second day of a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, the focus is now shifting to the country's vacant presidency. With the truce seen as a crucial opportunity, a parliamentary session, the first since June of last year, is going to be held next week to vote on a new president, with the final decision expected on the 9th of January. Well, Lebanon has been without a president since October 2022. With the deeply divided parliament failing to agree on a successor to Michel Aoun. Well, previous votes have been split between candidates Jihad Azur and Suleiman Frangieh, neither of whom secured enough support to win. Well, Lebanon's presidency is reserved for a Maronite Catholic, the premiership for a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament for a Shia Muslim. Well, in the absence of a president, authority rests with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Well, to discuss the potential end to Lebanon's political paralysis, we can cross to Beirut and speak now to Ghassan Hasbani, who is the former Lebanese Deputy Prime Minister and Public Health Minister. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, sir. You're currently MP for the Strong Republic Bloc in the Lebanese Parliament. Your country, of course, has been without a president, as we've been saying, for more than 2 years. It's now been announced that this special session of Parliament will be held on the 9th of January to elect a new president. How significant do you regard this development as being?
Well, it's quite an important development because we have been asking for this session for more than 2 years. And we would hope that this session would actually be a full constitutional session. What does that mean? Because all the previous sessions were held as a single session, whereby the first round requires a supermajority of 86 votes for anyone to be elected president, while the second round would require only 64 plus 1 votes. But we never got to the second round. The Speaker, Parliamentary Bloc, and his allies, Hezbollah, have always walked out of the room, leaving the session without quorum in the second round. And we had multiple first rounds that have been called for, and this is why we never were able to get a president democratically elected in more than 2 years. So we're hoping that this would be a significant step and that they would stay in the room for a second, a third round until we elect a suitable president to lead the country in the next phase.
Okay, so who is that suitable president? Are there some candidates that you can see everyone rallying behind at this stage?
There are candidates that could rally people behind them. Some names are known, other names are still kind of in the development. We need somebody, more importantly than the name, we need somebody who can, first of all, this is a presidency for 6 years, not just for 1 year. So we need somebody who can establish stability and work with the Lebanese armed forces to implement the ceasefire and any further agreements and international UN resolutions fully and properly, because we cannot go back to what we were before the war. Secondly, a president capable of rallying the Lebanese people around a vision, around the constitution, able to rebuild the state system and rally people around the state, and at the same time be able to lead the country out of its economic downturn that we've been living through for more than 4 or 5 years now.
Okay, so given what you've just described as being the profile of the perfect candidate and the circumstances in which Lebanon finds itself, would you say that the right person would be more likely to be a career politician, or do you think a technocrat would probably be the right person for this kind of a job?
Well, it's going to be a complex job. Definitely the right person is somebody who values the Constitution and would implement his oath on protecting and implementing the Constitution, somebody who understands the public sector workings because they need to hit the ground running, somebody who is respected internationally as well because there's going to be a lot of engagement with the international community for the recovery, and someone who can at the same time understand economic issues and be able to lead the recovery plan together with the Prime Minister. So yes, there's going to be a technical background, a technocratic background, as well as somebody who understands also the workings of Lebanese politics. They could not just be parachuted into this position, and Lebanese public administration. All of these are criteria and important traits. However, more importantly, someone who's a sovereignist, who believes in the finality of the Lebanese state as it stands today on 10,452 square kilometers, somebody who would also uphold the Constitution and be able to declare that and implement the fact in the Constitution that no one carries arms but the Lebanese sovereign armed forces. And this is a starting point.
Okay, and I noticed you used the word his on one occasion there. It doesn't sound like you think there are any women candidates waiting in the wings.
At this point in time, I don't think there are any women candidates who have a serious chance of getting there, although we would hope that there will be more candidates coming forward with these qualifications and these commitments publicly made. We had asked, at least our bloc, that the next president should be clear about his or her position, but most likely it's going to be his because this is where most of the candidates are. But if it is a her, that would be great. Position with respect to the implementation of UN resolutions. Now that we have a ceasefire agreement that enforces the implementation of UN Resolution 1701 and all the preceding resolutions, we do need a president that actually believes in that and capable of following it through.
Okay, and given, we're talking about a date of the 6th of January by which time a president might be agreed on. I mean, the situation Lebanon is in is extremely critical. And given these critical times, don't you think an emergency measure could be put in place so that this is done sooner? I mean, rather than waiting for another 6 weeks when the country needs leadership?
Absolutely. This is what we've been calling for. In fact, we called for it to be done 2 years ago. And throughout, we proposed candidates. We went to every single session and voted for a candidate. And we kept asking for a session to be held continuously, non-stop. So yeah, we do hope if it happens, we would like it to happen today before tomorrow. But that's what the speaker decided on. We don't know the reasons behind that. He surprised us this morning. At least better late than never.
Okay, I mean, obviously the people of Lebanon have been through absolute hell the last 2 months or so. Aside from installing a new president, I mean, what do you think are the other main priorities for Lebanon's political class to ensure that Lebanon's 5 million people get the future that they deserve?
First of all, definitely forming a government, nominating a prime minister, forming a government very quickly, a government capable of managing and conducting all the reforms and the tough measures required for the reforms, instilling stability and ensuring stability on the military side so that no weapons will be present outside the sovereign armed forces and the authorized security forces. So basically, this would be a dismantling of all armed militias, infrastructure, and recovery of any existing weapons across Lebanese territory. Thirdly, the priority would be to safeguard the borders and Lebanese territory across all land, making sure that all borders are properly controlled, and to embark on a recovery plan for the country, economic recovery, social recovery, and a complete overhaul and restructuring of the public sector, reducing its size, corporatizing certain state-owned assets to improve their performance, and addressing the financial services sector problems, and dealing with the depositors' money who are still waiting for the fate of their deposits after the crisis, then putting together and launching a full recovery initiative for the economy and fiscal policy.
Okay, so clearly lots needs to be done. I mean, one other thing that I'm wondering how you think this is going to be done. I mean, Hezbollah obviously isn't going anywhere. How do you think Lebanon decouples itself from Hezbollah and its grip on power and their apparent ability to hold the whole country hostage?
Well, we can't assume that Hezbollah is not going anywhere. Hezbollah is gone. Hezbollah, as we know it, as we have known it for 40 years, is no longer. Now we have a new set of options for Hezbollah. They either continue trying to rearm and fail in that and go against the international will and most of the Lebanese will, or they accept the fact that they can be part of a democracy like all other political parties and become a political party to play the role that is given to them by whoever wants to support them. And this is their right as a political party. But they need to be under the umbrella of the state, like everybody else, on an equal playing field. So this is not about decoupling. This country has tried to decouple itself from a paramilitary force that has existed for 40 years, and it hasn't happened. And this impossibility of decoupling led to the country collapsing economically and then collapsing militarily and socially, with billions of dollars in losses, more than $10 billion in this war, 45,000 houses destroyed, 100,000 damaged, more than 12,000 injured, and 4,000 killed. All of this is the cost of having this failure of decoupling or trying to decouple Hezbollah from the government without any results. Now, what happened has happened. Devastation has happened in Lebanon, but we should not let this go without any plan or any action to fix the situation for the future and never go back to the point we were at before the war.
Do you think Hezbollah is going to buy into that and play ball?
No, I don't think so. But this is not probably going to become a choice at some point in time. It's going to be a global will imposed on the situation. And most of the Lebanese want to move forward. The international community has put its weight to guarantee that, and we hope they act on it. The war, unfortunately, that nobody wanted, and we had warned against many, many times before, and called upon Hezbollah not to engage into a regional war, and they never listened. This war should not return. We hope it does not return. But it does seem that if Hezbollah is not compliant, this war might return and might go on. Lebanon has been given a chance by the sponsorship of the United States, France, and many other countries, and Arab countries as well. But this chance may be lost if Hezbollah keeps insisting on continuing the fight. The ceasefire decision or agreement is quite clear about the dismantling of all paramilitary infrastructure or military infrastructure outside the Lebanese armed forces, to disengage from any military acts and to collect any existing weapons and to prevent new weapons from entering the country or being manufactured in the country. The text is crystal clear, clearer than any UN resolution that we have seen so far. It is basically a practical and on-the-ground implementation and interpretation of all UN resolutions 1701, 1559, 1608, and others that have been written over many, many years.
I just want to ask you lastly, in a piece that was published on Al Arabia's website by Makram Rabah, who is an assistant professor at AUB, perhaps you're familiar with his work, he said that the ceasefire deal was, quote, nothing short of a total capitulation to Israel's demands. Obviously, this deal was agreed to under duress by Lebanon. Do you think it was a good deal?
It depends on how you look at it, because a good deal would have been to implement 1701 and 1559 earlier this year before the war happened. We would have avoided a war, we would have avoided all the losses that I mentioned, and we would have actually had stability in the country, reaching a very honorable point where we are in harmony with UN resolutions and the international community and bringing back Lebanon to the place it should be in. The failure of implementing those resolutions and the refusal of Hezbollah to comply with those resolutions led us to doing this under fire. Unfortunately, no one can agree with having a war or putting this duress on the implementation. But again, the point of view of many neighboring countries now is shifting towards a more stable Middle East, and we need to be part of this more stable Middle East and stop the donkey shot approach to instability. So under duress or not, this is reality, and this has been the result of the war. The destruction that has happened to Lebanon led to this final decision to which Hezbollah has actually agreed, and the Lebanese government has agreed. And if they do not wish to implement, then they will put us all back, all the Lebanese back, into a war situation.
And just before we say goodbye, I just want to ask you, Mr. Hasbani, on a personal note, how it feels to wake up every morning, as you have done for the last 2 mornings now, without the sound of drones, without the sound of planes, without the sound of shelling. How does that feel?
It feels very good. This is the country we want to live in. This is the country we want to have permanently. But it also is worrying because it is very fragile, this stability. It's we're cautious all the time. In fact, we did have certain bombings in the south already. So effectively, we don't feel yet that the war is really over. It really depends on how seriously Hezbollah takes this agreement in terms of implementation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ghassan Hasbani, thank you so much. So Lebanon has entered its second day of a ceasefire, but concerns remain with reports indicating a potential breach on both sides. The IDF states that it has detained 4 Hezbollah members who approached Israeli troops in southern Lebanon. They also reported firing on several individuals they described as suspects, this in Mais al-Jabal. Meanwhile, the Lebanese news agency reported that 2 people had been injured in Israeli shelling in the Nabatea governorate. Well, despite Israeli warnings against movement beyond the Litani River, displaced Lebanese civilians are returning south, with some heading to villages where Israeli troops are still deployed. Well, let's cross back to Beirut now, and we can speak to Khalil Helou, who is a retired general in the Lebanese army. General Helou, it's great to have you back with us on Al Arabiya News.
Thank
you. In your opinion, is the third Israeli-Lebanese war really over, or is this merely a 60-day pause?
No, it's not over at all. And I remind everybody that the first war between Hezbollah and Israel occurred in 1993, the second one in 1996. Then we had the Israeli withdrawal in 2000, and then in 2006. And this is the 5th time we speak about a truce or a ceasefire. So as far as the ingredients of any war are still there, I mean, the Hezbollah armed branch and the Palestinian conflict, as far as these ingredients are there, and as far as Iran involves itself in Lebanon, I think that this truce will be fragile. And the first elements of this fragility, we saw them today and yesterday. Israel fired on what it considered a movement that are a breach to the ceasefire, where they said Hezbollah elements were moving south, or that Hezbollah elements were manipulating missiles, short-range missiles, So they targeted them. And yesterday, the Hezbollah speech in Lebanon by Hezbollah MP and Hezbollah ministers are of a concern, because we understood that they don't want to withdraw their weaponry from south of the Litani, and they were questioning about the efficiency of the deployment of the Lebanese army south. So all this raises concern that this is a truce that saw the light under pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, first of all by the delay of the delivery of some important ammunition from the United States, because when this truce was announced, the US announced that they will deliver for $620 million of ammunition to Israel. And the second thing is the arrest warrant against Netanyahu issued by the International Court that France said we give immunity to Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that there was a bargain behind this truce. And when things are this way, I don't think it is serious. We may believe that this is a true ceasefire once for all when Hezbollah complies with the International Security Council Resolution 1701, 1558, and accept to give their weaponry to the Lebanese army according to this resolution. And when we find that Hezbollah complied, first of all, with the resolution 1701 without any pressure, then we can believe, then we may believe that this will be a real ceasefire and a real stability.
Yeah, I mean, General Helou, do you think they're likely to do that, Hezbollah? And, or do you think they're just going to use these 60 days to regroup and rebuild? And how is the Lebanese army going to play a part to make sure they don't do that?
Okay, now Hezbollah needed desperately this ceasefire, because their strategy, number one, is to spare what remains of their military power. And their military power has been seriously degraded by Israel during 14 months of bombardment. And the second strategy of Hezbollah is to keep its strength and assertiveness in the Lebanese interior affairs. So Hezbollah during these 60 days will reorganize for sure, will try to rearm, but this is unlikely, because Syria is the pathway to this rearmament, and it is now, it has been bombarded heavily by Israel, and even United States Air Force targeted some Iranian fractions in Syria that tried to fire on the US bases there. And today we have a huge battle in northern Syria where we are hearing about incursion of Turkish tanks toward Aleppo. So all these events converge toward one thing. It's a warning to the Syrian regime to stop funneling weaponry to Hezbollah. So Hezbollah will try to regroup, to reorganize. And unfortunately, I cannot tell about the Lebanese army, because the Lebanese army received instructions to go South Lebanon and to start deploying there. And it effectively started deploying in the region of Marjayoun. But the government orders to the Lebanese army are not very clear. So I'm wondering if the Lebanese army encounters Hezbollah weaponry or try to seize it or to confiscate it, what may happen? So this is a real concern that I cannot predict for the time being. We better wait for the future days in order to have a better assessment of the situation.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, because it's quite confusing for people outside Lebanon to understand this, and it's really important. So we've got these 10,000 Lebanese army troops deployed to the south. If they see Hezbollah violating the terms of the truce, you're saying that the army doesn't really know how they're supposed to respond?
Yes. In principle, the army should seize all the weaponry and should kick out Hezbollah elements north to the Litani. But the attitude of the ministers of Hezbollah yesterday in the government, because, you know, our army follow the government. Our army is not a political independent institution. It is a tool in the hands of the Lebanese government that is vague regarding the implementation of the 1701. The Prime Minister and all the other ministers, they say they want to implement it. But the ministers of Hezbollah are taking a vague attitude toward this. So this is why I think that the Lebanese army should be very tough, should confiscate any weaponry south of the Litani in order to comply with the international resolution and to have the backing of the international community. So this is the main point. This is what should be done. But let's wait for the future days, for the next couple of days, to have the first tests about that.
Okay, so, I mean, it's not just the Lebanese army, is it? There's UNIFIL is there, and we've got the so-called tripartite mechanism, which is the US, France, and UNIFIL working together, plus the Lebanese army. They're all tasks with, they've got the same goal, which is to make the south of Lebanon safe, to make sure it doesn't pose a threat to neighboring Israel, to make sure there aren't any violations, and to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't drag Lebanon into another war. Together, do you think they can do it?
Well, UNIFIL is in Lebanon under Chapter 6 of the UN. It is not a combat mission of UNIFIL. It's an observation mission. And the US and French observers that would help are not yet on the ground, I suppose. And these are only observers. These constitute an umbrella for the Lebanese army, an international umbrella to act in order to restore the Lebanese sovereignty in South Lebanon. All these are positive elements and are subjects of hope. But I still put a question mark on what will Hezbollah do. If Hezbollah is really in this government, and if Hezbollah really accepted all the deal, they should comply and withdraw without the use of force and without contact or without clashes with the Lebanese army. It didn't happen yet. And the Lebanese army didn't deploy yet in all the south. They deployed only in the area of Marja'yun, where Hezbollah withdrew. And I remind that this is a Christian area in South Lebanon where Hezbollah is not welcome. So let's wait and see the next days, as I said.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. General Khalil Helou, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just as the dust is settling in Lebanon after the latest truce deal, Israel has stepped up its bombing campaign in Gaza, killing dozens of people. Well, the strikes have hit northern and southern areas of the enclave, including a refugee camp in Nusayrat. Well, the Israeli ground invasion expands deeper into Gazan territory with tanks in Rafah near the border with Egypt. Well, on the one hand, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is grappling with louder calls to implement a ceasefire in Gaza, while he is also battling a case in The Hague over war crimes allegations. Well, the Premier's office says it is going for an appeal at the International Criminal Court with a demand to delay the implementation of the ICC arrest warrant. Well, the statement also says that a rejection of the appeal would be perceived as bias against the state of Israel. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to General Israel Ziv, who is a retired Major General and former head of the Israel Defense Forces Operations Directorate. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I'd just like to start by talking about what's happening on Israel's northern border in Lebanon. Israeli tanks reported to have fired at 6 areas of Lebanon within 2 kilometers of the Blue Line today. Just how serious do you think these violations of the truce have been?
Hi, Tom. Well, we knew that it will take kind of, first term to settle things down and to see, whether the Hezbollah is testing us or not. So it was expected, and I think we might see of that trials of, to check us in the next few weeks. But this is the reason why we gave for this settlement 2 months. The 2 months is kind of a testing time to see if Hezbollah stands on the demands and is really, withdrawing north to the Litani or not. and whether they are trying to fire at the Israeli forces over there. We'll see in the coming days and in the coming weeks what is going on.
Yeah, and of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying these 60 days are going to give Israel the chance to shift their focus to Iran, to refresh their forces, and also isolate Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I'm just wondering whether, though, in your opinion, this latest war between Israel and Hezbollah is over, or whether you see these 60 days as just being them pressing the pause button.
I think I would bet that it will be over. I think that the Hezbollah situation is very tough. He was hit very, very seriously. Both his strategic level, his tactical level. Is not in a good operational condition, and definitely he needs that long time out to recover itself. And we need to do everything to prevent it, especially in the southern part of Lebanon, but also with the hope that the Lebanese army will take over the rest of the areas, by the way, according to Resolution 1701, and will be able to dismantle Hezbollah and maybe other groups from their arm. But the key issue is how in power is the Lebanese army. And I think that our agreement, it does not include specifically any means or intention, to take that part seriously. And without the Lebanese army to be, much stronger, it's kind of a reputation for what was already happening, because it's a weak army, it's not strong enough.
Sure, but it sounds as though, from what you were saying earlier, that as long as there are no major violations of the ceasefire agreement, we could have lasting peace at long last between Israel and Lebanon.
I think so, yes. All the conditions are there. Things needs to be seen in the field, in the territory, but I think that most chances is that, we're going to have a peaceful time for the next few years. This is my opinion.
So it sounds to me as though you think Prime Minister Netanyahu was right in agreeing to this ceasefire agreement. And I say this because there were some in Israel, and there was one notable voice in Prime Minister Netanyahu's inner circle who were very much against it, who called it a big mistake. But are you saying Prime Minister Netanyahu was right?
Not only he was right, I think we could have it already several weeks ago, and maybe even with better conditions. But definitely it is the right decision. We have to remember Israel is after 14 months of a very long fight. Actually, it's the longest war since the independence. And the attrition is also in our powers as well. So I think that, yes, it is about time not to last this war longer, but to cut it and to go for that resolution. But again, the key is not just the agreement between us and Lebanon. The key is how to enable Lebanon not just to hold, but to gain their own power, their own control, on Beirut, on other areas, because if Hezbollah is going to take over again Beirut, it means that he will go south. And if he will go south, to the mid-country, he will go south to the south of the country, and then we'll have the deja vu, the same thing again as it was before.
Now, let's talk about the Israeli residents who live just close to that northern border. They haven't yet been able to return to their homes yet, I gather. But when do you think they could start doing that?
I think not sooner than the 2 months period. If the 2 months period is working well, and things are going in the right direction, I think that that would be the right time to start bringing them back to their homes. But I don't think that we should do it, or it should happen earlier than that.
Okay, well, let's turn our eye now to Gaza, because of course a lot of people in Gaza saw what happened in Lebanon, a much shorter conflict than what they've endured. 14 months it's been in Gaza. 44,200 people have died. Today alone, at least 17 Palestinians were killed. And I'm just wondering why you think it's taking Israel such a long time to conclude its operation there.
I think that the government is not in a, unfortunately, it's not in a position to take the right decision. And the right decision should be to conclude the war over there, to bring back the hostages, and to take the Americans' offer to have a plan of policing the territory so it will not be rebuilt by the Hamas. But from political reasons, the government, is not going for that. While they are not taking the decision, the army has to, to kind of cut the grass. They need to go wherever the Hamas is rebuilding itself, and to dismantle those rebuildings, and that happened in Jabalia or in other places. Now they went to Rafah, and yes, unfortunately, every such operation, it meets uninvolved people as well, and this is not in any intention for that. But as long as there is no substantial decision of the government, the army has to maintain the area and prevent the Hamas from regaining power again.
So do you think there's any chance of a ceasefire in Gaza before President Biden leaves office, or would your prediction be that it's unlikely to happen before Donald Trump arrives at the White House?
I think that there are negotiations. Be honest with you, how serious they are, I don't know, because we have those negotiations before. And by the way, both sides, the Hamas and the Israeli government, were not willing, to pay the total price of that ceasefire, whatever it is, to each side. Now, I think there are better chances for that, because I see some more serious intentions of the Israeli government. But to be honest, I think that before Trump is coming to the White House, to his office, I'm not sure that any serious step will be taken in Gaza, unfortunately.
And just lastly, I'd like to get your opinion on the ICC decision to issue an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, both men accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. And I'm just wondering, what do people in the ranks of the army there in Israel make of all of this?
Look, I think it's a very poor decision, and the pressure should be to establish an inquiry committee, a national inquiry committee in Israel. Israel has a very strong judicial system, and to put us together, or the Prime Minister, together with Sinwar or the Hamas leader on the same line, I think it's a very big mistake. It's a confusion between right and wrong. We have to remember, Israel did not invite itself to go into Gaza. And we all still remember, hopefully, what happened on October 7th, this vicious attack, terror attack on civilians. Now, with all the respect, this is a defense war of Israel against the Hamas. And if we take that rationale out of such a war, it's not just a problem for Israel. It's a problem all over the world that is trying, the liberal and world to fight against terror. So I think it was not the right thing to do, and it's nothing connected to Netanyahu or to Gallant, which, by the way, yes, they've made the mistakes and they try to correct it, but there are other ways trying to correct it and not, send him a subpoena to ICC.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us once again. General Israel Ziv, thank you so much. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been hailing his country's new Oreshnik hypersonic missile, which he says turns everything into dust. Well, President Putin's comments come after last week's Oreshnik missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, which he admitted was in retaliation for Kyiv using longer-range Western missiles. Well, during the course of the last 24 hours, Russia has carried out attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving more than 1 million people without power. This as winter sets in. Well, for more, we can speak now to Alina Frolova, who is a former Deputy Minister of Defense for Ukraine and now Deputy Chair at the Center for Defense Strategies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've just seen the second big attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this month. At least 1 million people, as we were saying, without power, and this as winter approaches. Do you think this is an attempt to dent morale, and is that working?
Well, obviously, what Putin is trying to do is like an escalated maximum before Trump will go into the office. So we did understand and we did plan that it would be like a multiple attacks at the energy infrastructures. That's somehow, unfortunately, expected thing. And we think that this type of attacks will continue till the end of January.
But in terms of affecting morale?
Well, this is not the first winter in war. Last winter was not easy too. And I think that the Ukrainians are quite resilient now. We don't have actually any choice because we do understand that this is the war for our existence. So we are keeping high. We made a lot of preparation on like a private housing, and people made a lot of preparation how to keep up without heating and energy. I think that this is not something which can hit the morale of Ukrainians.
Yeah, this is in fact the 11th major attack by Russia on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this year. And I'm just wondering, typically, how quickly Ukraine can recover from damage like this. I mean, are they able to quickly repair a bombed out substation, for example?
Surprisingly, it's very high, like a speed of recovery. However, this year it would be more difficult because last year we used a lot of resources for this recovery process, but usually it takes like 1-2 days, up to 3 days to stabilize, to reroute the electricity supply from very heated area to some kind of other resources. And then it can take like a few weeks then to stabilize the schedule for supplies and to go out for some normal scheduling. So like 2 days, it's usually 2-3 days to give the electricity in some points, but then stabilization takes few weeks.
And is your understanding that attacks like this on civilian infrastructure, such as a power plant, does that constitute a war crime in your understanding?
Sure, yes, because in accordance with all the war laws and laws of different type, international and domestic, that's the war crimes. And we collecting all the evidence as usual. We have a lot of expertises demonstrating what kinds of weapons were used. And all that is like a one big file for the future, we hope, trial against Putin and Russia.
Okay, let's talk about weaponry for a moment, because for the second time in less than a week, President Putin has said today on a trip to Kazakhstan that the Oreshnik hypersonic missile that's been used in Ukraine could be fitted with a nuclear warhead. And we're talking about a missile here that's got a top speed of 13,600 kilometers per hour. And I'm just wondering what message you think Moscow is trying to deliver by using this type of weapon?
From military point of view, it has absolutely no sense because, well, they use, for example, Iskanders, which also are carriers potential carriers of nuclear weapons and which can demonstrate now the more destructive power. But they became some kind of usual part of the war now. And I think that there is something which they try to tell with this Oreshnik usage, although this is a old Soviet type, like a post-Soviet type development. It's not something which they invented now. So they try to demonstrate to Western countries and first of all to the United States that they are ready to escalate till the nuclear level, yes, and they try therefore to get the best position for future negotiations. Because again, from the military point of view, it has no sense to use it. It brings no such a destruction about which Putin was talking. So you saw that the enterprise factory, actually, which they hit it was this Oreshnik in Dnipro. It actually stayed almost untouched because they don't have any type of other heads on this weapon except nuclear, and they didn't use the nuclear. So that's only the political message, and this is message for more to our partners than to Ukraine.
Okay, so President Putin's claim that this weapon can turn everything to dust, you're dismissing that. And with regards to speculation that the attack in Dnipro with this type of weapon could be a prelude to some more heavy attacks on Kyiv, on the capital, do you think that's likely?
Yeah, I think it's likely that they will use some kind of this type of weapons to hit the Kyiv. At the same time, Kyiv is the biggest protected city. I mean, the hardest protection, air defense protection. That's first. And the second, actually, as I said, that, for example, this night we had an attack on Ukraine, including Kyiv, with more than 100 missiles. And this is quite a destructive attack, but still we're here and we operate and we didn't lose the government and we continue to fight and will continue to fight.
And you mentioned in your previous answer the talk of nuclear weaponry. Al Arabiya has done an exclusive interview with the former Russian president and the former prime minister of Russia, who's now the deputy chair of the Russian Security Council. I'm talking about Dmitry Medvedev. He told my colleague, Abdeljawad Al-Roshid, that the use of nuclear weapons by Russia would only ever be a last resort. Let's listen to what he said.
The use of nuclear weapons, according to our doctrine, it's a last resort. We don't wish that to happen at all. There are no lunatics in the Russian leadership. The president has clearly articulated his position when he adopted the new adjustments to nuclear deterrence by looking clearly at the situations in which a nuclear response could occur. These situations are a reality. The new foundations of nuclear deterrence, I mean the state's political doctrine on nuclear deterrence, made the threshold for using a nuclear weapon much lower to reflect the risks our country faces. Russia is at war with the entire Western world.
That was Dmitry Medvedev speaking exclusively to Al Arabiya. Fair to say that his rhetoric sounded a lot less alarming than quite a lot of the other rhetoric we've heard from the Kremlin, for example, last week.
Well, first of all, never trust Russians. Whatever they talk and whatever they speak about, this is never is a truth, even if this is signed doctrines or something like that. So you cannot rely on that. And for them, this is all like a big psychological operation. So one people are saying more alarming, another less alarming. So they try to keep some kind of open windows, small windows for negotiations. So I think that this is like all the well-coordinated operation of influence, and I won't rely on some serious words of Medvedev or someone else from Russia, including the Russian opposition, because they are like a part of one big game.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening on the battlefield itself. The war reported in recent months to have been going more in Russia's favor, I think it's fair to say. Ukraine has had more than a week, though, to use these US-supplied long-range missiles and British-supplied long-range missiles on Russian targets. What's your assessment of what's happening on the battlefield, and how much difference are those long-range weapons making to Ukraine?
The situation is difficult. It's really so, because we got actually an attrition war where Russia will potentially has better chances because of bigger numbers, bigger number of people, bigger number of highest economy, bigger number of weapons. However, we are not speaking about just the land war, so we need to look at the whole front line, and political and geopolitical and military. And Russia is advancing only at one small piece of this front line, which, just to remind you, only land frontline clashes are at 1,500 kilometers, and we're speaking about like a spot of like 10, 50 kilometers length. So that's like a very minor part of the front line. And just to remind you that also Ukrainian forces are doing operations at Ukrainian land in Kursk. So this is like some kind of fluctuation, natural fluctuation of the front line, and nothing critical yet. And I think that we need to think about this, like advance or not advance of Russia in complex vision. And Ukraine, as you rightly said, that we had only 1 week of using the long-range missiles, and what Ukraine is trying to reach to isolate the logistics, supplies, and critical infrastructure of Russian, military infrastructure of Russian, to broke up these terms on the front line. I think we need more time for that, obviously, but I don't see yet the situation as a critical one for the course of war. I see the critical moments at some frontline spots.
Okay, and obviously President Zelensky continually calling on allies to speed up the delivery of weapons. I mean, do you think there's a concern in Kyiv that supplies are going to dry up under the Trump presidency?
There could be such a case, yes. So, and we do conscious about that. And I think that what a Biden administration is trying now to make, it's to create some kind of reserve for the few months of the presidency, first months of the presidency of Trump, which makes sense with all these claims and clarity actually of the real politics which will be applied. And I think that anyway, we will have the gap in supplies after the Trump go into office, just because they need to reestablish all the processes, evaluate what they would like to do, what they don't want to do, and this reserve will make a good service for Ukraine. However, I do not expect that states will stop completely supplies. Anyway, they will be continuing. The issue is about what is the end goal and what the policy will be accepted by Trump. And plus, we have supplies, of course, from other partners which are increasing, and Ukrainian defense economy is rapidly developing, and with the financing which provided by our Nordic partners as for now for Ukrainian defense industry, we have some kind of contribution to cover those gaps which can possibly appear for the first months of Trump presidency.
And just lastly, before we go, and briefly, if you will, there are reports that the Biden administration there in Washington is urging Ukraine to drop the minimum age of conscription from 25 to 18. I'm just wondering if you think that's realistic, and what Kyiv is saying about this.
For now on, it's not realistic in Ukraine because we still have a reserve of the higher age. From now on, just to remind you, 25 is the age which was established. And actually, we have a lot of reasons behind why not to do it to 18. But the only thing I would like to say that sometimes we're quite surprised that we're receiving a lot of tactical advices from our partners who don't have the, let's say, experience of such a war which we are heading. So I think that we have our reasons to do so, and I don't think that the government and Zelensky will adopt this decision of 18 years for conscription.
Okay, well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Elena Frolova, thank you very much for your time. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a wrap of the best interviews of the week. Until then, goodbye.